Good afternoon, Dolphins fans. Welcome to another episode here of On the FinSide with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all of our social media outlets, as well as the finfanatic.com website and the FanSided Network. I'm Brian Cat, NFL. Paul is fanatic_pick. And the Dolphins here trying to get back on the winning track, play the Minnesota Vikings this weekend, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern time. We are joined by Eric Thompson here from the Daily Norseman to give us some insight on the Vikings. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at Eric_J_Thompson. Has a lot of great insight, as well as the Daily Norseman does for SB Nation. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a few years, obviously, since these teams only play once every 4 years.
We do. We did this 4 years ago. It was actually the week after the Dolphins had that miracle comeback on that miracle play, and then the Vikings, basically pummeled the Dolphins into the ground. So this year it's going to be in Miami. Vikings off to a 4-1 start, and returning a lot of the familiar faces, same pieces. Kirk Cousins at quarterback, Dalvin Cook at running back, wide receivers, a great tandem with Justin Jefferson, who's leading the NFL in receiving, along with Adam Thielen. So, what's kind of the overall feeling with the Vikings right now?
Well, I've been lucky enough to attend the last 3 games for the Vikings. 2 of them at home and 1 of them in London. Made the trip over there. I think the 3 wins that the Vikings have strung together took about 3 weeks off my life total because they definitely weren't easy, despite having a pretty nice lead in the last 2. But they're winning. It's 4-1. These are the kinds of games that traditionally the Vikings would give away. The game against the Lions, where they were trailing most of the time, had to come back with the last minute touchdown. The Saints, the dreaded backup quarterback, which we're probably going to see again, it sounds like, this coming week. The Vikings always seem to struggle with that, but they pulled out the win thanks to the double doink in London, and taking care of business after a dicey game against the Bears too. So there are definitely some flaws on this team. They can't live like this every single week and can expect to come out with a victory every game. But so far, so good. I think if you told any Vikings fans before the season that they'd start out 4-1, they'd take that in a heartbeat, and I'm right there.
Certainly. And like you said, the last 3 games, a 4-point victory over the Lions, a 3-point victory over the Saints, and a 7-point victory over the Bears last week. So all within a touchdown. I'm sure all of them came right down to the wire on that. But yeah, as far as, and actually just as of a half an hour ago, the Vikings are going to face a backup quarterback, and that's going to be Skylar Thompson, not Teddy Bridgewater. That's just been announced. So on the defense, let's start there on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously a lot of changes there. They bring over, the name's escaping me, but the Broncos, Ed Donatel, the Broncos defensive coordinator. They've gone from really a 4-3 defense, my understanding is, to a 3-4. What kind of overall changes have you seen in defense from the Mike Zimmer years to so far here with Ed Donatel?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences, not just in the personnel, but definitely that 3-4 scheme. And I think Vikings fans, if there was one point of frustration thus far, it is on that defensive scheme. The 3-4, I think people are embracing it, and that's okay to switch to it. But it doesn't seem like, at least thus far through the first 5 games, where they're giving their best players the best chances to succeed. There's a 3rd and 10 when the Bears were making their comeback last week, where both Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith dropped back into coverage, which is probably not the greatest utilization of their skills. And the pass rush is the main concern. With the bookends that the Vikings do have in Smith and Hunter, you'd expect some pretty consistent pressure. But I think overall, through the first 5 weeks, the best consistent pass rusher has probably been DJ Wonnum, who is supposed to be a rotational guy. It's been a little perplexing, to say the least, for Vikings fans, just to see the lack of kind of explosion and just variation. I think the Bears kind of exploited that. The Vikings dominated the entire first half of that game. Some special teams blunders let the Bears come back and score a touchdown right before halftime. But it just seems like the Vikings are kind of giving the teams the same looks for 60 minutes, and teams are eventually figuring it out. And the Bears are no offensive juggernaut by any means. So, Justin Fields set a season high with 15 completions, I think, last week. But it just seems like they're just kind of running their shell defense and kind of waiting for teams to make mistakes. And it's a vast contrast from the Mike Zimmer, having the different looks and having Harrison Smith line up all over the box and having that A gap look with, Anthony Barr, of course, is in Dallas, but Eric Kendricks is still there, replaced by Jordan Hicks, who's had a rough year in pass coverage, but he's a sure tackler and he's been okay. It's just there are a lot of questions to answer there, and with the offensive weapons, even if it is a backup quarterback, the offensive weapons that Miami has, especially at wide receiver, it could be a tough matchup for them.
Yeah, and defensively, you look at their edge players, Daniil Hunter, Zadarius Smith, DJ Wanham, each 2.5 sacks or more each. Teron Armstead needs to play in this game for the Dolphins at left tackle, and he's very iffy with a toe injury. He's going to try to make it. Knowing Teron Armstead, he probably will. I'm not sure if he would finish the game. He hasn't the last two, but we'll see. Greg Little will line up at the right tackle spot, and that's a game right there that, if you've got Hunter, Smith, and Wanham providing pressure on Skylar Thompson with two, frankly, backup quality offensive tackles, if Armstead doesn't play, that could be a rough situation. Looking overall, though, at the Vikings defense, fair to say really just strictly a zone defense that doesn't switch it up very often?
I wouldn't say strictly, but that is the wrap. They're a lot more zone than what they ran under Zimmer's defense, and that's kind of been a frustration point. Is you kind of know what you're getting with the Vikings defense. You might have some looks here where you're dropping these pass rushers into coverage, and with the 3-4 defense, that's kind of the why you do it, is you can kind of be a little more unpredictable just by your base defense. But again, there haven't been many surprises. They haven't blitzed much this year. And I think that's especially with the tackles that Miami might be forced to trot out there. If the Vikings don't see consistent pressure, I thought for sure that the Vikings would just pester Fields the entire game last week, and he had some time, especially in the second half. And that's pretty alarming because the Bears' offensive line, I think, is in much worse shape than Miami's. So this is kind of a prove it game, I think, for the defense, that they've had a month plus now to try to kind of round into shape. We haven't quite seen the results there on defense. So it'll be really interesting because I think with the wide receivers that Miami has in Waddle and Hill, it's if you give them time to get open against the secondary, it could be a long day for the Vikings defense.
And that's the major matchup we keep going back to, is Dolphins offensive tackles against the Vikings pass rush. Because I think you're right on that. Even with Skylar Thompson and a quarterback, there could be enough separation from Hill and Waddle to make that happen. Talking a little bit more about your secondary, Cameron Dantzler comes up with the big play last week late in the game where he strips the ball from, I believe, Equinemius St. Brown, might have been Dante
no, it was former Viking Amir Smith Marset.
That's right. That's right. The former 5th rounder out of Iowa, who was cut at the beginning or at the end of training camp here, and now is with the Bears. I think that was his first catch of the year, I think.
I don't think it was his first catch, but he has not been used very often. And that's
going to be his last.
Yeah.
Sure. But Cameron Dantzler, coming out of Mississippi State, not a very fast guy, but has settled into this zone defense. And at safety, they've got Harrison Smith and Cameron Bynum. Smith, multiple-time Pro Bowler, getting on the wrong side of 30. Bynum at free safety, won the battle with Lewis Seen, who's now on injured reserve. Tell me a little bit more about your secondary there and kind of where the strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah, I think overall, again, how they're schemed is I don't think they're going to give up a lot of huge plays unless the play breaks down and the quarterback has a lot of extra time. And with Dolphins wide receivers, they probably don't need as much time as most teams because those two can, with the speed that Miami has, it could be a lot quicker. Again, Patrick Peterson and Harrison Smith, they're the two cagey vets. They're not going to be out of position very often, but they like you said, they are on the wrong side of 30. Peterson isn't the Arizona Peterson. He's still definitely serviceable, but he's not the all-pro that he used to be. And Harrison Smith, again, I would like to see him used in a little more variety. I think he's still one of the better safeties in the NFL. He had a great pass breakup that forced a field goal instead of a touchdown for Chicago late in the fourth quarter last week. but yeah, the secondary is it, and it was really unfortunate to see Lewis Dean, who was starting to ramp up, and he had a couple snaps the week before the New Orleans game, and then getting hurt on special teams and being out for the year. That's a really big blow for this defense, just for the depth. Cam Bynum has last year when Harrison Smith missed a couple games, he was really good. Bynum as a starter overall, he's been, I'd say, pretty average. He hasn't been a disaster by any means, but he's not going to. He isn't Harrison Smith. He isn't filling in that free safety role like Anthony Harris did when the year that he had 7 interceptions a couple years ago. So it's not a huge weakness, and I think Dantzler overall, and it wasn't just that the big play that he made. He has had a really good year. He was really up and down under Zimmer because his snaps were kind of all over the place. He'd played 50 snaps one game and then get 15 or 20 the next game. As the every down starter on the outside, I think Bynum's improving, and I think that's a promising part. But yeah, if there are any more injuries or setbacks for this secondary, that I think the depth or lack thereof could really show. So, and they're going to have their work cut out for them no matter what this Sunday.
One thing that'll be interesting to watch is if this Vikings defense dares Skylar Thompson, who does not have the strongest arm, to really beat them over the top against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. That'll be fascinating to see. Hill and Waddle, reports come out today. They should both be on track to play. So on the offensive side of the ball, Kirk Cousins kind of I think this is his 4th year with the Vikings now, right? Or maybe 5th.
5th, I think. Yeah. Gosh. 2018 was his first season. Yeah.
Okay. And on the season, over 1,300 yards passing, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, quarterback rating of 86.4. Dalvin Cook, a stud when he's on the field, 4.6 yards a carry. Justin Jefferson leading the NFL in receiving yards with 544 yards. Then after that, you've got Adam Thielen as their second receiver with 248 yards on 25 catches. When I look at the Vikings, I see an interesting matchup going back to the offensive lines in this game, where in the 2021 draft, the Dolphins were picking 18th. They had Jalen Phillips and Christian Darrisaw, 2 of the top rated players consensusly on the draft board, and they're going to match up in this game. And Darrisaw, no sacks allowed in his final year at Virginia Tech. Looks like he has really hit the ground running here in the NFL. Tell me a little bit more about your offensive line. Do you see this as one of the strengths of the team?
Surprisingly, and this is the first time I can say this in the last 7 or 8 years, I think, that the offensive line is pretty good. It used to be one of the biggest liabilities on the team, basically since Kirk Cousins has been there, especially the interior of the offensive line. The Vikings have been pretty set at right tackle now for a few years in Brian O'Neill. I think he's one of the better right tackles in the league. He's had a little bit of a dip maybe this year. He hasn't been the basically set it and forget it kind of right tackle. He's allowed some pressures and a couple sacks, where the first couple of years of his career, he was pretty consistent. But yeah, Darrisaw is, I think, even as high as the expectations were coming in as a first rounder last year. Of course, he missed most of training camp with an injury, kind of ramped up slowly in 2021, but he has really hit the ground running. I mean, it's hard for a left tackle to have a highlight reel, but he definitely had one. I mean, he absolutely pancaked Robert Quinn a couple times last week against the Bears, and he has been, again, like, we expected quite a bit out of him, but he's still been a pleasant surprise in there. And the interior of the offensive line, for the first time in recent memory, isn't an abject disaster. Now, Garrett Bradbury, he did not earn his 5th-year extension for the Vikings. This is his 4th season at center for the Vikings. He has been serviceable, and that is a big upgrade of what he's been for the last several years, probably due to, in part, that he has some serviceable guards next to him in Ezra Cleveland, who had a 90 PFF rating last week against the Bears, and rookie Ed Ingram, who's definitely had some bumps in the road, as I think he's still probably the weak link of the offensive line. But again, he's a rookie. He's going to have games like that. The rookie out of LSU, he's been good. And I think, I believe Darrisaw is in the top 2 or 3 in tackles for a PFF grade, and O'Neill's still good. It's basically, what we've been screaming for here in Minnesota is just to have a serviceable offensive line. And I think through the first 5 games, they've been well above average, and that's been a really big part of unlocking this offense.
Yeah, so you're not missing the Matt Khalil, Phil Lodeholt, Brandon Fusco days?
Well,
Yes.
I miss Lodehold. He was good. Khalil after his rookie year, yeah, that was an absolute disaster. But yeah, just having giving Cousins time, and especially the one way to short circuit this Vikings offense over the last few years has been getting direct pressure up the middle, and especially with some of the defensive tackles that the Vikings have faced in the NFC North, that was a really easy way to get I think the Vikings were among the league leaders in 3-and-outs on offense last year, even with the numbers that they put up. So it's nice to have them sustain drives, and again, with the defense being a bit of weakness in this first 5 weeks, the best way to get rid of that is just to have them on the sideline for more of the game. And they definitely dominated time of possession last week. And it's nice to see them sustaining more drives.
Certainly. And what I respect about the Vikings offensive line, all 5 guys that are starting healthy and drafted here
Right.
within the Vikings. And a fascinating matchup on the inside is going to be the Dolphins. One of the strengths of their defense right now is defensive tackle, with that 3-man rotation of Zach Sealer, Raekwon Davis, and Christian Wilkins, going up against Evan Ingram, a rookie, as well as Garrett Bradbury, who, my understanding of him as a player is that he can move, but in pass protection, a little bit undersized, can be knocked back. Is that a fair assessment?
100%. And that's basically, if I've made the joke in a couple articles, if the defensive tackle's weight starts with the number 3, Bradbury's in trouble. Like he is undersized. And even when his technique is good in pass protection, he can get shoved literally just straight back into Cousins. And he's been a little lucky, with Akeem Hicks finally going to Tampa Bay instead of terrorizing him in Chicago. They haven't faced a ton of top-notch defensive tackles yet. So that matchup with Wilkins is going to be definitely one to circle on Sunday, because I think he could give Bradbury some trouble. And again, Bradbury has been, out of his 4 years in the league, this has definitely been his best start to a season. And he's not going to be all pro by any means, but if he can still be serviceable and keep Cousins clean and let him get to his second and third reads, I think the Vikings offense could have some success on Sunday.
Certainly. And yeah, really good left side of the line, like we talked about, Christian Darrisaw and Ezra Cleveland, 2 guys drafted from the Vikings. That I could see a lot of runs there to the left side, and it's up to Jalen Phillips. This is a big game for him to go up against his former 2021 draft classmate and win that matchup. It's not going to be an easy task. Justin Jefferson on the season, like I've said a few times here, leads the league in receiving yards. When I look at the game logs, 154 yards, 147, 184 in 3 of those 5 games. In the other 2, you've got 48 and 14 yards. So the obvious question is, from your end, what did the Eagles and Lions do that held Jefferson to under 50 yards?
Well, I think both teams really kind of sold out and definitely double teamed him a lot more than everyone else. But the Eagles got to the Vikings with pass rush. They had a lot of pressure, and especially in that first half in Philadelphia, they just didn't give Cousins a ton of time. The Lions basically sold out and said, make someone else other than Justin Jefferson beat you. It took the Vikings a while to do that, but Adam Thielen had a pretty big game in that week as well. So it's and there were some, well, I don't want to be too much of a homer, but there were some questionable defending from some of the Detroit's cornerbacks. They were the referees are kind of letting them play that day. But again, that's the nice thing about having both Jefferson and Thielen and KJ Osborne here and there as a third wide receiver, is that if you do sell out and try to make anyone else other than Justin Jefferson beat you, the Vikings do have the weapons to do that. They have Adam Thielen. They've been running a lot of multi-level looks where it's Cousins reading the defense versus, wherever the safeties and the corners are going to meet up. Most of the time it is, they're trying to offer help on Jefferson, but that's a lot easier said than done, especially on crossing routes with Jefferson. He's been getting open a lot underneath and then is making a lot of his yardage after the catch. And Cousins, for all the complaints you can have about him, he is an incredibly accurate quarterback. If Jefferson or Thielen are open, he's usually hitting them. So it'll be really interesting to see what kind of strategy the Dolphins deploy, and especially depending on the health of their secondary, because I know Xavier Howard sounds pretty iffy as of today on Wednesday, whether or not he's going to play. Because I think that'll make a huge difference if Howard isn't able to go.
100% agree. And yeah, that'll really determine in a lot of positions, I wouldn't recommend anyone going one-on-one the entire game with Justin Jefferson. I mean, I think Jair Alexander, who's a great cornerback, saw that in week 1 against Jefferson.
Yep.
But yeah, Howard has been battling a pretty serious groin injury. All indications are he's going to try to make it. How well he does is in question. I mean, really the last 2 games that he's played. I mean, the last 3 games he's been out, he's left early and he's left early. So that's not a great situation. Hopefully he's a little bit more healthy this week. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine Jefferson getting double teamed. And that seems like it's a strategy that only against Jefferson has worked pretty effectively. You got to make the rest of the Vikings offense try to beat you. But they do have Thielen and Irv Smith and obviously Dalvin Cook and a very good offensive line too. So that's where we're looking at here. Before we get to predictions, any Vikings concerns or insights optimistically or negatively looking into this game here for against the Dolphins?
Well, it's Miami early in the season. That's always kind of a good equalizer, especially if the Dolphins are shorthanded at all. That does make a difference. I think you saw it in the Buffalo game, where Buffalo, as much of as they dominated statistically in time of possession, it looked like they kind of ran out of gas. That's if the weather looks like it's going to be in the low 80s again. You're going to have to rely on your depth probably a little more than you would if you're playing indoors in Minnesota. And I think that's always a concern, and it's a nice home field advantage for the Dolphins, and it's proved that way. I mean, I don't know how many times throughout the years against Tom Brady, even if it was in September, it seemed like Dolphins usually had his number there. So that's a factor. And again, the defense, it's going to be like, what if the Vikings give that vanilla kind of cover 2 shell against the Dolphins, and Spencer Thompson, can basically complete a pass or 2, I think it's going to be tough to get that 1-2 punch, because Miami's 1-2 punch at wide receiver is right up there with Minnesota. So it's going to be basically if they can pressure Thompson and give him some looks, and Thompson, he had like 25 or 26 rushing touchdowns at Kansas State. So he's definitely has that ability. And the Vikings have struggled against that so far. They let Fields really get back into the game with his legs, and Jalen Hurts basically took what the Vikings gave him. And a lot of times that was running. So if Thompson can get out of the pocket, keep drives extended when they are flushing them out of there, that could be a big concern too.
Certainly. Well, what is your score prediction here, Eric, for this game?
Well, and I mean, we're still pretty early in the week, and we're still kind of have some iffy players. I think just with the Vikings have a really poor track record against backup quarterbacks for whatever reason. They let Andy Dalton hang around. Again, Dalton's kind of a unique case because he's a pretty capable backup quarterback. I think with Thompson in there, it would have been really interesting with Bridgewater just for the storylines and the quote unquote revenge game, and to see him back in there. But with Tua basically ruled out in Bridgewater at backup at best, I really think the Vikings should take care of business. I think I don't think it's going to be a terribly low scoring affair, even with a third string quarterback in there, just because I think the Vikings defense has had some struggles, and it should be it's a road game. It's always kind of unpredictable with the Vikings, and the Vikings could almost as easily be 1-4 as they are 4-1 with the last 3 games that they've had. So it'll be really interesting. I'll say the Vikings something along the lines of 27-20. I think that's my early prediction. Of course, I might tweak it by the time I actually make my prediction later in the week, but I'll say Vikings by touchdown for now.
Yeah, I'm really in that same area. I've got, as of right now, 24-21 Vikings. It sounds nice, the Dolphins and Vikings both being 4-2, and like you said, they could easily be 1-4. But they did win those games, and they've shown a lot of strengths here in their team. Might look like more of a 4-2 than a 5-1 team to me, but still, I mean, I look at the matchups, Vikings favored by 3, and I can't get over, the Vikings edge players going up against what could be Brandon Shell and Greg Little at the tackle spots. And then Justin Jefferson leading the NFL in receiving yards,
Mhm.
going up against a secondary that's been battered, and it's had a ripple effect here on the rest of the defense. But Eric, I'll tell you what I tell everyone else. I don't say good luck, or because I wouldn't mean it, but I hope you enjoy the game. Be sure to join Eric on Twitter, Eric_J_Thompson, and visit on SB Nation, the Daily Norseman. They have a lot of great content out there. Before we sign off here, anything else that you want to say or promote, or anything on your end?
No, I think you covered it. Most of the majority of my content these days, either on Twitter, or we have a weekly show that we just did on Tuesday. It's called Viking Hot Takes. It's like very PTI-ish. It's 20 minutes. We ask each other, the co-host Flip and I ask each other 3 questions with 20 minutes on the clock. So it's a nice, quick, easy watch. It's a nice way to recap the previous week's game and take a first peek at the upcoming game. And of course, I'll still write here and there. I don't get to write nearly as much thanks to having a couple kids and a busy day job, but it's still
And a
keep
dog,
an eye out.
obviously.
And yes, he's made a ton of Oscar's made a huge cameo appearance. Every time I talk on the video here, he has to come down and say hi. But yeah, that's the Daily Norseman and Eric_J_Thompson on Twitter. That'll get you there.
Well, I've got 2 dogs upstairs, and they're probably I've heard them barking from my end, but I don't know if you have from yours. So that is all part of the gig. And hey, thanks for joining us, Eric. And I really hope you enjoy the game and have a great Sunday there. Follow Paul and I on the FinSide on Twitter, Facebook, all of our social media outlets, as well as the FanSided Network and FinFanatic.com. I'm Brian Cat NFL, and Paul is Fanatic_pick. If it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the FinSide.